The interesting thing
Yeah.
to me is they continue to do it as they did it before, as if none of what's happened in the past 9 months or what happened in the past 10 years has happened. You speak of the Supreme Court, and Roberts, is like, well, why are people so critical of the court? And then we have data that shows that this court is being used by the Trump administration as no other court has ever been used, where the administration has gone to the court more times than the past four administrations added up in 9 months, asking for permission to do things and getting it. Usually getting it on a shadow docket, which used to barely exist before, without any explanation. And when there are explanations, the explanations just don't hold water. You had this decision a few weeks ago where they said um, that it was okay to use racial profiling to round people up in the street, and Justice Kavanaugh said, "Well, that's okay because we know that a police law enforcement officer will treat the people the right way, and if they have evidence of their citizenship, they won't do anything bad to them." And I mean, and I can give you the other example. The reasonable Republicans, right? Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins, and they're always coming up with a rationalization so that they end up going along with this stuff. And I wonder at what point the outrage will emerge, because and this is a flip side of this story, of course. These are real people who are being rounded up, whose families are being destroyed. These are real people who are going to see. And the Democrats are fighting on health care, and I'm reading stories that the White House recognizes their vulnerability on this, that healthcare costs for millions and millions of Americans are going to go up now, that hospitals are going to get be unable to operate as they did in the past now. Millions and millions and millions of people. And I have a theory. I'm writing about this theory, so I'm going to just give it to you, and then you can
Yeah.
respond to it. But my theory, which has come in part out of our conversations, is, we used to talk about the silent majority, and people talk about soccer moms and whatever as the decisive groups in a vote. I saw somebody was peddling the idea that in the next election, the crucial vote is going to be weighted vest moms or some kind of craziness, and but here's who I think it's going to be, and here's who I think is going to be the downfall of these Republicans, and I would call this a group that defies characterization in any of the normal labels we use. I call it the self-interested majority.
Yeah.
I just mean people who act for the one reason that people ever really act, which is their well being and the well being of their families, or their sense of, what their opportunities or risks are in life. And the reality is 75, 80% of Americans, for self interest, oppose what's being done here because they're a person of color, because they need health care coverage, because their jobs are being destroyed in their neighborhood, because the administration is attacking their blue state, but they're not Democrats. In Illinois, there are a lot of Republicans too, right? And I just think this self-interested majority is going to be the downfall of all of these people. I don't understand. I can see it. I don't understand why they can't see it.
So I actually think that either way this ends up, Democrats will win on the shutdown for precisely the reason that you mentioned. And here's what I mean. If Democrats had caved and basically said, okay, we'll continue to spend as we have, continuing resolution, then we would have seen, first of all these Medicaid cuts take effect. and be devastating to hospitals and to millions of Americans. And Democrats would have gone along with it, in effect. And the Republican win machine would have obfuscated who's responsible for the horrors. And then we would have seen premiums from the Affordable Care Act skyrocket, and it would have been the same thing. By shutting down the government, by agreeing that they would not go along, they didn't shut down the government. It was Republican obduracy that did it. But by saying we are going to stand up for your health care, what Democrats have done and what they need to do more of now, and I wish, I mean, we've said this before in these podcasts. What Democrats didn't do that they should have done was a month before we had this confrontation, every single day, every single member say over and over again in every single venue, they want to take away your health care. We won't let them. And get the message out there, because the reason that so many self interested people have not risen up at this point, I believe, is that millions of them don't know what's happening and don't know who's responsible. They don't pay attention. And if they are paying attention in the slightest way, instead of those like us and the active groups who watch all kinds of media, and instead of the cultists who watch Fox News and listen to talk radio, if you just sort of tap in every once in a while to so called mainstream media, you aren't going to get the sense that we are at a crisis point. They're not following this stuff, or if they are, they're trying to shoehorn it into something that this is within the bounds of normality. It just may be at the edges of it. And they're treating the shutdown as who will win and who will lose, not over what the stakes are for all of this. So a shutdown at least provides an opportunity. And what Democrats need to do now during this shutdown is to find ways to reach those large numbers of Americans who are not paying close attention, to make it clear why they stood against Trump policies, Republican policies that were going to devastate the entire healthcare system. And if in the end they have to go along with getting government running again, and it's because they've decided that they can no longer stand by while other devastation occurs. When these cuts take effect, more Americans are going to know who's responsible, who stood with them in their own self interest, and who stood with the Trumpist Republicans, the John Thune, Mike Johnson Republicans, all of them in the end, who said, sure, we'll take away your health care because that's what Donald Trump wants us to do. At the same time, David, I think going back to an evergreen for us, when people elected Trump and Republicans under the promise that they would blow up government, it was people not realizing that government acts in their self interest. It was, hey, whatever government does is for them, and we're the ones paying for it. And now we need a massive education, and some of it's going to come through trauma and hardship as people begin to realize what government does for them. Uh, I was talking to somebody who works for FEMA the other day. What a catastrophe we have there. And when we have more devastating floods and storms and fires, and the federal government isn't there to step in and help people out, I hope enough of them realize that it's because of what Donald Trump and Russell Vought and their other radicals have done to destroy the capacity of government to help people when they're in need.
I hope so. I hope that we still are, we have the avenues of response, electoral response and others that we have now. Some of the tools that we used to have are going away, right? The mainstream media, which used to call these people to account, which they railed against in past administrations, that's gone. We have the news this week that CBS News is being taken over by an apologist for the right wing, Barry Weiss. We have, they're now, the same company is now, eyeballing CNN, and we've seen newspaper after newspaper fall. That guardrail is gone. The guardrail of decent voices in the Congress is gone. The guardrail of the Supreme Court is gone. And we're left with elections, and we already know that they're trying to rig the elections. They're going to whether it's by gerrymandering or by changing campaign finance laws or by changing voter ID laws or by changing or sending troops into cities so that they intimidate people from going out and voting. And don't underestimate the degree to which sending ICE out is an effort to take anybody who feels they might be rounded up wrongly, American citizens, they're going to stay home. They're not going to go and get involved in the civic discourse in their cities. And I just though it sure does look like the midterms are our last best hope. And if they are conducted fairly, what's your feeling about it? We're about a year out. What's your feeling about whether that's going to actually happen that way or not?
I'm increasingly nervous, and it's for a couple of reasons. We saw Trump in his incoherent and unhinged talk to our military leaders, put on by the utterly vile Pete Hegseth, um, talk about sending troops in to conduct war against democratic cities. So, and then we see what's happening with ICE. One of the things that really worries me is that we are not going to have a free election no matter how much we try. And we are going to see, I will make a prediction right now, in areas where they've tried to curtail mail in voting, where they're finding ways to reduce the number of polling places. And we're going to have long lines in areas where there are substantial numbers of Hispanics and other people of color. And we're going to have ICE invade those areas, pull people who are citizens waiting to vote out of line, detain them, first of all, beat them up while they're there, with the idea being that the other people waiting in line are going to disappear, uh, citizens or not, fearing that it will happen to them and their lives will be destroyed or at least disrupted. And they're going to find other ways. And, the gerrymandering is one small part of all of that. So I worry about that. I also want to, just for a moment, address the media stuff. I had my latest piece in the New Republic this week has been about media concentration. And I actually started by going back in my time machine to the 1990s when President Clinton picked me to co chair a presidential advisory committee on the public interest obligations of digital television broadcasters. Digital television was new, and it was the idea was we had public interest obligations. Radio and television broadcasters had been given for free public airwaves worth billions, now many much more than billions, and in return they were supposed to act in the public interest, and there was a certain set of obligations. Whether they followed them in the breach or not, the obligations were there, and we were to update those obligations and try and make sure that things could work in the digital age. We had broadcasters, we had public interest people, we had other top people. We had Cass Sunstein, the great law professor at Harvard, who drafted for us a new set of updated public interest obligations. And all the broadcasters said, we don't need to have this enforced upon us. We will do it voluntarily. And they did nothing. They had enough support. Our mandate was to try and reach a consensus. The consensus watered things down. We had promises, almost in blood, that they were going to do stuff. I worked with Walter Cronkite and the great journalist Paul Taylor. At that point, just one small thing. It was just pledge and follow through that in the 30 days before an election, 30 days, 5 minutes a night, In the broadcast night from 5:30, 5 o'clock till 11:30, you can do anything you want with that 5 minutes, but it has to be about politics and the election and the campaign. Educate people, do mini debates, give a minute of free time to candidates who otherwise would not be able to get any airwaves. Oh, yes, of course, almost none of them did anything. So even back decades ago, it was clear that broadcasters had no sense from what had been the pioneers in the past that they had a public interest obligation. It was all about the money and knowing that they could violate with impunity. Now we fast forward. We have five companies who control 90% of these entities. And as you alluded to, it might soon be four companies. We have, because of what's happened in the digital age, newspapers that struggle and can't make it. We thought that the benevolent billionaires like Jeff Bezos, who would rescue us by taking the signature papers like the Washington Post and the LA Times and use them to promote the public interest, even if they weren't going to be able to make money. And of course, it turned out that it's all about their money and their other interests. So we have no guardrail in our public media, with some notable exceptions. The New York Times actually has not been purchased by one of these billionaires who will sell it out for their own other economic interests. For all of its warts, it's done a commendable job. We have people like Lawrence O'Donnell and Ali Velshi, who are being courageous out there, even if the audiences they reach are not that broader audience that we hope to reach. We have a feckless White House press corps. We have a group of congressional Republicans, as we've talked about. Many, like Mike Johnson, might know better. It doesn't change their behavior one iota. The same with Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who have a kind of wink and a nod arrangement with Thune and the other leadership, that they can vote against them when it won't matter, but will vote with them when it does. And that puts us in a really bad place. And even worse is that they are not just going up to the edge of legality. These villains, these evil people, are crossing over into straightforward, unconstitutional, and illegal actions and are getting away with it. So we have to hope that the midterms will provide something different. We have to work night and day, and everybody listening should support organizations doing election protection. But we've got an uphill battle here. We are not just sliding into autocracy, we are sprinting into autocracy. And our hope is that, this interesting columns this week, Substacks by Paul Krugman and Elliot Morris, about Trump's public opinion standing being in the dumps and worse than any other president at this stage of a presidency since we've been measuring them, and whether there is a point at which his approval rating drops where some of these self interested moral cowards decide that it is more in their interest to get a little distance from him. But 40% isn't going to do it. It will take, I think, a complete collapse of our economy, more instances of people dying or suffering mayhem because of measles, polio outbreaks, another pandemic where they are ill equipped to deal with it, uh, listeria and E. coli outbreaks because they've blown up public food safety guardrails, along with healthcare collapsing. Maybe that will take some of that 40% who support Trump down to 30% or 35%. Maybe we'll see a change in behavior, but I'm not counting on that or on any of it. We're in a very bad place, David.
No, yeah, there's no question about that.